Thank you very much, Bill. Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Bill. As you say, we're old friends, and it's a pleasure to continue to work with you. I hope we're still old friends at the end of my presentation. I was never very good at languages at school. I struggled with German, and then I ended up in a German university for a year, and I kind of got there. And later on, I worked for fairly regularly in Russia, and I had Russian lessons, and I can just about navigate my way through a hotel or a shop, but I'm still very bad at it. And then when I got here, I realized that I needed lessons in how to pronounce the name of the great city in which we are right now. And after several lessons, my pronunciation is as follows: Louisville. How did I do? It's a real pleasure to be here. I've actually been to Kentucky 4 times, which doesn't make me an expert, but I hope it makes me a friend of the state. I passed through in 1997 when, in a kind of rite of passage, at the end of my Oxford education, I hitchhiked with a friend right round the deep south all the way down to New Orleans and then back up through Memphis. I was in Memphis the day Elvis died, and then I came back through Kentucky and onto Ohio and back to New York. And I wish I'd written it all down because it was an amazing trip. And then I came back here a couple of years ago to speak to the Pritchard Committee, and I want to put on record my continuing admiration for that organisation that's done great work for this state over a 25-year period, and particularly Bob Sexton, who I know died tragically last year and whose work was instrumental in bringing this state forward. And then in this last few months I've been here to meet Commissioner Holliday, and now I'm back. So thank you very much for the continuing invitations. It's quite a tough act to follow a local businessman who's made good with pizza and to be the warm-up act for a great Commissioner of Education who's coming after me. And we saw something in the little video there of the importance of the job that Terry is doing, and particularly the vital process of implementing successfully the new standards across the state. But I want to, before I get into education, I just want to talk a little bit about the world we're in, because it's changing so dramatically and so fast. When I was born in 1955, there were 2.5 billion people on planet Earth. If I lived to be 100, God forbid, there will be 9 billion people on the planet. In the last decade, the percentage of the world's population that lived in urban areas passed 50%, something that happened in the US in 1920 and in the UK in 1851. So we're a crowded planet, and we're an increasingly urban planet, and those urban areas are very diverse places. Toronto, for example, 57% of the population was born not just outside of Toronto, but outside of Canada. 33% of London's workforce was born outside of the United Kingdom. And what's reflected in those big cities is also reflected in many other cities around this country and around the world. 3 billion of those 9 billion people, the 7 billion people that currently live on planet Earth live on under $2 a day. And there is huge growth in the global economy. You don't feel it in the recession or coming out of the recession slowly as we are in the UK or here in the US. But you see it if you go to Singapore or China or India or South America. You see the dramatic growth in the global economy. In fact, I don't know if this statistic is true, but I saw it in a book and I thought it was worth hanging on to. If you add up all the economic growth from when the Egyptians built the pyramids through to when the US built the interstate highway system, that's a lot of economic growth. The world is destined to create that much economic growth again in the next 20 years. So this is a very rapidly changing planet, and that has consequences for biodiversity, for the way we live, for the way we educate our future generation. The amount of information available to all of us is growing. Bill mentioned that he'd Googled me. We can do that for anybody and anything, and we can find out all kinds of stuff. The amount of information produced in a given year these days far outweighs all the information in all the libraries full of books that were built up in the rest of human history put together. So this is a very rapidly changing place. And then you come to government, which was picked up in the last session, basically. Government can be big or small. In a way, that's a matter of choice for the populations of different countries, and people choose different options. according to what they want government to do. But what really matters is that whether or not a country chooses a big government or a small government, that the government is effective. The really big test of the 21st century is effective government. Look at the last 30 or 40 years and just look at some pairs of country. Malaysia has done quite well, but Singapore, which was part of Malaysia until 1965, has done spectacularly well. The difference is in the quality of government. In 1960, Ghana and Korea had exactly the same GDP. Now Korea's is like 10 times Ghana's. The difference is in the quality of government, and half the difference is in the quality of the management of the education system in Korea. Look at the difference between Pakistan and India over the last 20 years. I had the mixed blessing of traveling from Lahore to Mumbai in December. Lahore and indeed Karachi, you feel you're in a city that is being overwhelmed by population growth that is ahead of economic growth. You arrive in Mumbai, there are many of the same problems there, but you see that the economic growth is ahead of the population growth. You see the difference, the possibility, the optimism, that makes a difference. And again, the difference is in the quality of government. And India's government's not great, but it's a good deal better than Pakistan's. So the quality of government is a really critical issue, and one of the areas where it's most important of all is in education. But the big lesson I draw from those examples, and we could, between us, list many more, is that nobody in this modern world, which is rapidly changing with all that economic growth, owes anybody anything anymore. It's up to each place, each jurisdiction, each country to take control of its own agenda. I was brought up in the wonderful English city of Liverpool, where the liners used to cross the Atlantic to Boston or New York. It was the place of port of entry for Americans coming to Britain. It was the port of exit for Britons going to America. It was a great and successful port right until the 1950s, and then it plummeted. And in the 60s and 70s and 80s, it went through a really bad time. Lots of trauma, lots of unemployment, lots of difficulty, a school system out of control. At one point, a local government completely out of control in the 1980s. Terrible, sad story. And then at some point in the late 1990s, the city began to get a grip on itself. So this was the city that had the first ever passenger railway in 1830. It was a city that brought the Beatles to the world. I don't know if that's something to celebrate or not, but I celebrate it. And one of the great soccer teams in Europe. But it was struggling with everything else. And then sometime in the late 1990s, it began to get a grip. I was there in the middle of the last decade. I went a lot to try and help with the education system. And a cab driver and I were talking about this, and he said, I said, well, what do you think changed? And he said, we stopped feeling sorry for ourselves. We took responsibility for our own future. That's what any system that wants to move on, whether it's in education or the economy or whatever, in the end you have to take responsibility for your own future. And that's what they did in Liverpool, and they've made progress from a low base, and they're still making progress. But I think that sense of each place on the planet taking responsibility for its own future is absolutely vital. And what you see is that the countries or the places that turn inward and try to wish that all that stuff out there wasn't happening struggle. The people that turn outward and look out and make the most of those opportunities, they can make progress. And again, you see it in the examples I gave you a few minutes ago. The turning point for India was when it turned outward to the world in 1991. A couple of years ago, I was at a 50th birthday party of a close friend of mine in Wales. And we had the party, and then the following day we climbed a mountain in South Wales, beautiful mountain, very gentle walk up a hill, looking out over the sea. And so you get the opportunity to really talk to people that you've never met before. And one of the guys I'm walking with, I say to him, what do you do? He says, this is British English, I'm a monumental stonemason. It means he carves gravestones. So I'm feeling pretentious that Sunday morning. So I say to him, it must be really nice to be in a line of work not affected by globalization and technology. He says, what do you mean? I'd go out of business if I didn't buy my stone over the internet from India. There is no line of work left that is not affected by globalization and technology. It is changing everything. Every line of business, you can't find one. If a monumental stonemason can't get his stone and carve it without being part of the global economy, nobody can do anything. So these things are changing. So when we come to education, the challenge that I'm talking about, and they're in the slides here, one of the questions we've got to ask ourselves is, what do we want the young people who are currently in our schools and colleges to learn? What would we like them to know, understand, and be able to do when they leave our school systems? And there's a lot of debate about that. Here it's a huge debate because of the Common Core standards being adopted in Kentucky and 41 of the states of the Union. It's a debate in England where the national curriculum and standards is currently being reviewed. It's been a big debate in Australia where they've got a new national curriculum, again, the first for a federal country like Australia. It's a debate in Finland where they're very, very good at education, but they're wondering what the 21st century will mean. In Alberta, they've had a big consultation on what do we want an educated Albertan to be like in 2025. So this is a global debate, and nobody's quite sure of the answer, but I've tried to summarize what I hear as I travel around the world debating these things into a mathematical equation. And I want to share that with you before I go into more detail. Start inside the bracket. The first thing is a K. K stands for knowledge. Clearly, we want children and young people to learn some fundamental knowledge, the outline of the history of our country, something about the literature, definitely how to read and write, definitely how to do mathematics, definitely what Pythagoras' theorem is and how to apply it. So there's some basic knowledge that we want every child and young person to master. Some knowledge, of course, you can get by Googling. If you happen to forget the year of the Battle of Gettysburg, you can check it. I prefer people to remember. I was very impressed, by the way, by the US Bank founding itself in the year of the Battle of Gettysburg. It must be a courageous organization. But K is really important. Some basic knowledge is fundamental, and the ability to look up knowledge if you forget it or you need it for the first time. But nobody thinks that's enough. So the second thing in the equation is T, which stands for the ability to think, thinking. You see, one of the things that I guess you as employers want, certainly employers I hear around the world talking about, is we want people who take initiative. We want people who can think on their own and be imaginative, but we also want people who can think in teams and apply themselves in a group to solving a problem. We want people who have that ability to think collectively. We want people to choose. Sometimes they have to think under pressure and make a decision now because there's a deadline. Sometimes we want people to reflect and think quietly and differently over a period of time and review something. These are all different ways of thinking. We want inductive thinking, deductive thinking. We want creative thinking and logical thinking. All of these are important skills in the workplace. They're also, by the way, important skills in communities and families all around the world. So the ability to think in all those different ways is important. And it's not a different subject to be taught separately as a separate part of the curriculum. It's something that we want our teachers to bring to young people through the math, through the English, through the history, through whatever it might be. And then thirdly, inside the bracket, there's an L, which stands for leadership. Now, leadership means, in many of your cases, leading business organizations, or in the school system, leading schools, or leading school districts, or leading the school system across a state. I'm talking about that, but I'm also talking about something else. By leadership, I mean the capacity to influence people around you. We want young people who don't just know stuff and can think, but we want them to be able to bring that knowledge and that thinking to bear at points of decision. How often do you leave a meeting and on the way out the person you're with says, oh, I didn't agree with that? And you say, well, why didn't you say so? And they say, well, I didn't think it was the right time. What they mean is they'd thought about it, they had the knowledge, but they didn't apply either of those things at the point of decision, so the decision passes them by. That happens all the time. So great thinking and great knowledge is not applied sufficiently at the point of decision because somebody doesn't have the confidence or the awareness of relationships to enable them to intervene when a decision is being made. And so they comment after the event when it would have been much more productive to comment at the moment of the event. So knowledge is power, people say, but it isn't really. Knowledge plus thought may be power, but even that isn't really unless you've got the K and the T and the L, the ability to intervene. K plus T plus L, now that really is power and influence. And we want that for everybody. I happened to turn on C-SPAN yesterday evening in my hotel room, and I saw Tom Friedman being interviewed at the Aspen Institute, and he says to the person interviewing him, in our day, we inherited a job or we found a job. Our children are going to have to invent their jobs. Now, that might be an exaggeration, but there's a point there. And what you see in a recession is that the people who lose their jobs are just the people, they're not the people who are bad at their job because they've already gone, they're the people who are just ordinary at their job. The people who get kept are the people who add something, who go beyond, who give that little bit extra. So K plus T plus L is really important, and that's all in a bracket, and then the E. And the E stands for ethical underpinning. You see, our big cities can only work if people have a certain set of values about the societies they live in, and respect for difference, an ability to make relationships with people, tolerate people who have different perspectives, different backgrounds, an ability to contribute or to think through what it means to be a democratic society. It's a difficult thing. You definitely don't want governments writing ethical codes, but nevertheless, we do want from our education systems children and young people to come out with some perspective on the world that they're going to be part of. So that's my attempt to summarize what gets called a range of different things, 21st century skills, soft skills, whatever. None of the phrases that I'm quite happy with. It's that combination of things that we want our children to learn, know, understand, and be able to do. And the Kentucky standards really set high standards in the core areas of that, but the education people get around that really goes beyond the standards, not just here, but anywhere in the world. And you learn some of those things, not just from your lessons, but from the way the school operates as a community, from the way the school interacts with its community, from sport, from art, from culture, from all the other things that can be part of the school experience. So I think those are the world-class outcomes. And when I listen to the debate in Singapore or Ontario or Finland to take 3 systems on 3 different continents, they're debating that kind of stuff. So just as you in the US and we in the UK are trying to keep up with the top-performing systems, they're already moving ahead. As I said, it's a fast-moving world. We did a study, my colleagues and I, in McKinsey recently, of how do the most improved education systems in the world keep getting better. What we wanted to understand was not just what do the good systems look like, but how do systems at different stages of development keep improving? What's the mix of policies that enables you to improve? And we pulled out a number of lessons. And these are the things that need to be thought about when trying to achieve that E brackets, K plus T plus L close brackets for every student. Because, of course, in the 20th century, most education systems, including this one, including ours in the UK, including actually in the Soviet Union, they only thought about educating to very high standards an elite. And everybody else could get the basics, and that would be enough because there was unskilled, semi-skilled work available abundantly in the economy for most of the post-war era. That isn't true anymore. So we're asking our teachers to do something quite different. We're asking them to achieve high standards for everybody, not just for an elite. You see, when I was a history teacher back in the early 1980s, I taught my class history in that secondary school just outside of London, and some of them learnt the history and some of them didn't. And at the end of the year, I would say, well, he was a great student and he didn't do his homework, and her parents didn't care, and she didn't like history, and he didn't like me. And I had a whole set of reasons why some of the kids learnt history and some of them didn't. I didn't say, what do I need to do differently as a teacher to make sure they all learn to the high standard? I didn't say that. Now, I wasn't worse or particularly better than anybody else. That's just what we did back in the early 1980s, but it's not enough anymore. We're asking a lot more of our teachers than we asked them 30 years ago. There's a Charlie Brown cartoon where on a Monday he says, he bets with the other children, I'm going to teach the dog to sing by the end of the week. And the children take the bet on because they think they're onto a winner. It comes to Friday, they go to him and they say, the dog can't sing, we've won the bet. And he said, no, I didn't promise the dog would learn to sing, I promised I'd teach him. That's what I was doing in my history. That is what I was doing in my history class. I was teaching some of the kids history. But now we're asking our teachers right across this state, right across this country, right across the globe to teach everybody to high standards. It's a tall order. So what do systems have to do to enable teachers to do that? That's the question we were asking. And one thing is, it's not all about money. Here you've got a range of systems and their increase in expenditure between 1970 and 1994. You see huge increases in expenditure and minimal, if not negative, impact on overall student achievement. And we could replicate that data over and over again. So I'm not saying money doesn't matter. Of course it matters. But I'm saying spending money on its own won't fix the problem, won't raise the performance of the system. So what will?